I'm gonna it's recording to this computer and crossing fingers, everything is gonna work out. I suppose worst case scenario, we might need to do a second video, but that would be well, maybe not too bad because hopefully we would have a fun time conversing anyway. But
Yeah, well, we're under no kind of pressure as far as I can see. So, um, it doesn't matter, however long it takes or whatever it is. The Philogilus, an ancient Roman joke book, contains a joke that teaches us about personal identity. A barber, an academic, and a bald man were traveling together. They agreed to take turns keeping watch through the night. Barber first, academic second, bald man third. During his watch, the mischievous barber shaved the sleeping academic's head. When awakened, academic touched his bald head and said, "How stupid is this barber? He has awakened the bald man instead of me." The academic absurdly relies on an objective description to identify himself, despite being in the midst of a first person experience of being awakened. The academic has overlooked what I'll argue is the sole decider of who I am. I am whatever is having the first person experience I'm having. The objective description is an afterthought. Please keep this joke in mind as I start to explain my view of personal identity, which I call universalism. According to my view, almost all of us are mistaken about boundaries between persons. You don't discover who you are by checking objective facts about your name or history. You know far more fundamentally that you are the one whose experience is immediate, first person, the one that seems to be at the center. That immediacy is what gives you your presence in the world and self interest. It's what makes your pains hurt. But every conscious being has experience with that same immediate first person character. Nothing about it is unique to you. Being yours is universal in experience. Since all experience has the immediacy that makes your experience yours, universalism says you are equally all conscious beings. Each feels uniquely mine only because its content is cut off from the others. But the ordinary view adds something unnecessary to this explanation of feeling cut off. It adds the unwarranted assertion that also you are only one conscious being. This ought to be sliced out by Occam's razor. Why? Because it does nothing to explain the isolated feeling, which is already predicted by the lack of integration in both views. Cutting out this useless distinction leaves us with a simpler view, universalism. Consider split brain cases. When brain hemispheres are disconnected, two independent streams of experience appear, each feeling like the only one. But the original person can't be limited to one side. The immediacy that made experience mine must be present in both. Let me make this vivid. Each side of your visual field is processed in a different hemisphere. If your hemispheres were temporarily disconnected, both sides of the field of vision would continue with the same immediacy, unaware of each other. You'd be equally present in the experience of both. And you'd remember both disconnected experiences as having been yours after the suspension of integration ended. Just so, you are equally present in all separate, unintegrated experiences throughout reality. In the mouse scurrying across the meadow and the eagle spotting it from above. There's a decisive probability argument for universalism. If a coin lands heads 1,000 times consecutively, that's decisive evidence it's double-headed or loaded rather than fair. Now consider your existence. On the ordinary view, it's fantastically improbable. In your conception, any other sperm out of 200 million reaching the egg first would have prevented you from existing. Any different sperm in any ancestor's conception would have blocked you. The odds of you emerging from just 3 conceptions, you, your mother, your father, are 1 in 8 septillion. Add all your ancestors, all of them, forget it. So much for the ordinary view. But on universalism, your existence was guaranteed as long as any conscious being existed. Which sperm hit which egg was irrelevant detail, like a double-headed coin explaining 1,000 consecutive heads. Here's another analogy. Imagine a hotel with countless rooms, each with a sleeping person. In the easy game, everyone awakens. In the hard game, only one random person awakens. If you find yourself awake, the easy game is overwhelmingly more probable. For personal identity, only universalism, the easy game, makes your existence probable. Notice how, in both the hotel case and the personal identity case, it is important that the inference is made by an actual participant rather than just an outside observer. There would be nothing improbable about someone or other winning in either hard game. But it would be improbable for you, a random participant, to win in either hard game. In the book, I thoroughly examine this perspectival character of probability inferences and other aspects of probability that even experts still find puzzling, including the Sleeping Beauty problem, which I originated while thinking about cases like the hotel inference and personal identity almost 50 years ago. Universalism also explains why your universe has life-friendly laws. If there's a multiverse, and universalism is true, you'd find yourself in any consciousness-supporting universe. On the usual view, you'd be stuck in one universe, whether life-friendly or not, because even a duplicate of you elsewhere wouldn't be you. Making your observation probable requires combining a multiverse with the lubricant of universalism to put you in it. You who felt cheated and you who felt blessed, there is far more for you. Always escape alive from what harms or confines you. Find endless varieties of what you love. Death is not annihilation, for you're present in all conscious beings. Your self-interest reaches equally to all because their pains and pleasures are equally yours. You are in the oppressor and the oppressed, the perpetrator and the victim. Knowledge of this truth could soften narrow selfishness and curb retribution. You would know it's all you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yes. Do you want to dive into the details of the book and just
Yeah.
go through? Yeah. Awesome, awesome. I mean, I think I mean before we get into it, I want to say that um I resonate a lot with a lot of the things that you cover in the book. It seems like you've been thinking about this for a very long time. Even you mentioned like when since you were like a teenager, you were having a lot of these ideas. Uh, and I guess maybe it's worth sharing a little bit of my trajectory as well and kind of like interest in this topic because when I was a kid, I also used to think a lot about teleportation experiments, duplication experiments, split brain patients, and I was very confused by all of that. And it made no sense, like especially under the view that we have a soul, or like, we each are like our own individual streams of consciousness. And
Yes.
it was actually when I was 16 years old that um, I smoked weed, and I had a very unusual experience. I mean, it hadn't happened before. It hasn't happened since. It was just a once in a lifetime. Something strange happened at one time, which, in retrospect, was very much like a oceanic dissolution type of experience.
All right.
A very classical sense of realizing that I'm a balloon that has air inside, but then that the air inside is also the same as the air outside.
Oh,
And then kind of realizing that, well, even if the balloon breaks, fundamentally nothing has died, right? Like there's some kind of notion like that.
yeah.
Now, at the time I felt this was more of an intuition, like a powerful experience, not a demonstration. But I realized, oh my gosh, if we could formalize this philosophically, if we could actually, prove that we are all one, it would change the world, right? Like everything would change if that was kind of like proven to our satisfaction. And then yeah, for many years I spent a lot of time really thinking like, okay, what are the best arguments? How can I find other people interested in this topic? And even the first week of college, I went to the philosophy department and I was just asking philosophers, like, what do they think about this idea? And people pointed me to Derek Parfit, first of all. And so I just powered through Reasons and Persons on the second week of, of college. And, uh, and I remember feeling actually kind of dissatisfied because he he goes very far in his thought experiments, but then he kind of takes a he chickens out at the very end, right? Like he kind of like takes a step back at the end, and then oh no, well let's talk about conventional views and the R relationship, and like maybe there isn't a true fact about identity, and me and my friends we called Derek Parfit a little bit kind of with respect, but saying like, oh, Mister Almost, because he almost gets there, but never quite like makes the last jump.
I
And
can
then
tell you an anecdote about that after you say more.
yes, yes,
I
yes,
want to
awesome, awesome. No, no, yes. Then and then yes, I think other authors that I came across was Thomas Metzinger in his book Being No One, which also kind of like tackles some of these ideas. And then Daniel Kolak with I Am You, which, to be honest, I never really understood his arguments. He- it's very interesting that he arrives at similar conclusions, but I think from a very different angle. And I honestly
Oh,
never quite understood exactly what his line of reasoning was.
yeah.
And then another philosopher that really resonated with me was David Pearce, a British philosopher who talks about ethics and transhumanism, but also a little bit of personal identity. Um, but yeah, it was you know um, I think it's such a rich and amazing topic, and so I was very delighted to kind of like find your book and like okay, like you're coming at it from a very different angle, and it's very dense with a lot of arguments, right? Like you ultimately present arguments based on probability. But I took a lot of notes, and I counted something like you present something like 20 different arguments
Oh,
for
really?
universalism, and so it's
Yeah.
very very rich, and I'd be very happy to walk through them and also ask you some questions. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
You've taken more note of that than I have. That's you've counted them. That's great. Uh, but yeah, I mean, what you said about Parfit being almost there. Uh, so I'm not sure how much to say about this, but I my best friend uh, uh, taught at All Souls in Oxford, where Parfit was, and they taught seminars together. He was G.A. Cohn or Jerry Cohn, and I went with him to this high table thing that they got there, and I was sitting opposite Parfit, and started talking to him, and this was back in the '80s, and when I was writing up my ideas, and I sent rough drafts to him for a few years. And he wrote really nice things back to me about how amazingly interested he was in underlining of such things in the notes. And my friend Jerry said at one point that Parfit had said to him that he thought that I was almost entirely right. So he was interested in maybe pushing himself a bit further, but uh, I don't know exactly what happened after that, except that um, he, I think he got lost in the probability points, and because someone else I knew was temporarily at Oxford at that time and was talking to Parfit about it, and um, Parfit said he wasn't sure about probability because I had sent to Parfit a letter from Robert Stallnaker, a logician, um, and yet another person, Peter Unger, had sent him the rough draft because I mentioned Stallnaker in it. And I do in the book as well. I don't know if you recall.
Mhm. Yeah.
Stallnaker had an important effect on me. So anyway, Stallnaker wrote back, and he's Stallnaker's a very, very smart guy, and he had very interesting things to say about things like the hotel inference, um, and what became the Sleeping Beauty problem, because that was also in the rough draft, and he and he was very interested in those cases. Uh, and so years later, when Adam Elga, after hearing about this in lectures or whatever from Stallmaker, did the first article on Sleeping Beauty problem. He in the first footnote he said that Stallmaker had got the idea of these cases from unpublished writing of mine, which was a bit of a break for me because gave me kind of a wedge. And in the book, a whole part of the book is devoted to, well, arriving at universalism by way of the Sleeping Beauty problem. You can't solve the Sleeping Beauty problem without dealing with that. Which most people who've written about Sleeping Beauty problem don't appreciate.
Yeah.
Anyway, and Parfit wrote an article that appeared in something like London, the Times of London Sunday magazine or something, where he talked about probability and the anthropic principle and other such things related to it. But he was all confused. And he didn't understand the perspectival character of these inferences at all in that article. So I wanted Jerry Cowan to arrange a meeting between us. But somehow it never happened, and I have no reason why, knowledge why that was the case. I think Parfit was tempted to go further, as he should have done. He was stopped somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember this chapter in Reasons and Persons where he says something like, the standard view of personal identity, he analogizes it to the sun. That like a sense of continuity of an individual person is like, okay, the strong sense of personal identity. And then he says like, okay, we have proven that the sun doesn't exist, but at least there is the moon, which, he talks about like at least relation R and psychological continuity. But then, the response is to say, well, the sun is not the moon, or rather the moon is not the sun, right? It's
yeah. We don't need to settle for the moon, I think.
No.
And having read my book, you know that I there is a section in it where I deal with what Parfit says in some detail. I think he's hung up between two inconsistent things, right? Which is dropping personal identity, thinking it's just a fiction, and simply talking about these natural processes of mental development, because he centers his attention on the mind, particularly. The saying that he sacrificed a lot of what we think is essential to personal identity. In fact, he leaves behind identity as being important altogether, and turns it into something called survival. He just makes it into natural processes that he is admitting are not persons. So what have you got? Hung up between two things, because he's either the persons somehow aren't these processes, right? I call this view naturalism. He's not going to put up with any of these kind of supernatural looking things involved in ordinary view of personal identity. So either, okay, there are no persons, they're just these processes. Or another way of looking at that perhaps is, of course, there are momentarily persons. I mean, pains are experienced by something in the moment that's like a person in the moment, right? Because the problem is extending it beyond that for him. So it becomes a kind of Buddhism. So you've got all these momentary subjects, but they're not, there isn't threading through all their experience and proper thing of the sort personal identity would require. This personal identity is not in tune with what's actually there.
Yeah, what do you call the ultra insulating view, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Buddhism, in other words. Yeah, ultra insulating. Each moment is walled off from all other moments of experience. But that falls to the probability argument as well as the usual ordinary view. Because it's even harder for one of these momentary experiencers to come into existence.
Mhm. Yes. Why don't we go through the list of kind of arguments that I found on your book? I think that's so one thing you mentioned quite a few times is indeed the common sense view that identity begins at conception, and then of course you talk about how unlikely it would be, and you have some interesting ideas also about how the unlikeliness is a little bit strange also because we share ancestors. You have like some kind of a
Oh, yeah.
argument over that as well, but I think that's more incidental. It's not really a core. Um, but it occurs to me that yeah, if somebody, let's say, identifies with a particular genes, or like, okay, when the sperm won the race and and enter the egg, um, you could very much come up with kind of like a simple complication, which is like, well, what if we change the genes of the sperm with egg right after conception, right? Like, technically that would be equivalent to a different sperm having one. But I guess within the standard conception, like you would imagine, well, you already are that person. You either the changes to your genes then become circumstantial as opposed to ontological. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I was never that impressed with the genes being what's central to this, right?
Mhm.
It's just you got these two things being brought together in the conception, and you originate from that. Now, yes, they have certain genetic codes in them, and you might think that that is part of what constrains your identity. That you must have the right genetic codes, but that's a later bit of knowledge, or it's not, it, and yeah, I could imagine tampering with the genes, but it being that same little bit of stuff having, come together with the right sperm cell for you, right, and the egg. And I imagine, then tampering with the genes, changing them in various ways, and it's still being regarded as you.
Mhm.
So, but I, I'm not. Well, some of the people who argue for views that look like universalism, um, spend a lot of time on what are known as Sorites arguments.
Mhm.
Um, where do you draw the line? Right? If you change this many genes, is it another person, or is it, you know, how how can this make sense that there is a line when so if you changed 500 genes, it's still the same person, but and if 501 suddenly wouldn't be the same person. Right, I agree. I mean, there's a famous old argument, well, bit like the joke coming back to bald people, where you point out that if someone lost one hair at a time, be very hard to say when the person was suddenly bald. So maybe they're never bald, if you took out just one at a time. But we know that some people are bald. So the argument's fishy. It's wrong. Sorority's arguments are usually like that.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
and I don't spend any time with sorority's arguments. Some of my arguments may look like sorority's arguments because I'm changing a person, all right? But I'm always pointing out in such arguments that the immediacy is still fully there, and therefore the person is fully there, right? It's not that we're gradually coming to a point where the person isn't there, and I can't draw the line, right? Um, it's rather you see that with any of these changes, it's not budged at all in the direction of it not being that person.
Yeah.
So any argument I offer that looks a little like that, when you look closer, you'll see is not at all a sorority's argument. And in fact, my whole emphasis is on an experience being yours, not a thing being you.
Mm, mhm.
Because that's the usual view. That's the wrong view. That you're in the world because a certain thing that is you is in the world. And then, yeah, so philosophers may come along and say, okay, what if we gradually change that thing? Where do you draw the line between it being you and someone else? I'm not at all interested in that. I'm interested in that the only thing that makes a thing you is the immediacy of its experience. With that, it's you. Without that, there'd be no reason for calling it you.
Mhm.
Huh? So that's the key to this thing. But there are people again that put forward positions that look like universalism, but they haven't made that shift.
Mm, mhm.
In the book I talk about a dog in it and the dog's tail, and how in the usual view, the dog, the controlling thing, is there being a thing that's you. And then an experience being yours is just the tail being wagged by that dog. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Very nicely shown. Yeah, you can even read the labels.
Yeah, for the
Yeah,
curious ones. Yeah.
yeah. So the usual view, wrong way around, as it's identified there. The body is a thing being you, and the experience being yours is just a tail wagged by that. Whereas, in fact, what's happening here is that the tail is wagging the dog because the body of the dog, the important thing, is the experience being yours, which is entirely due to this first person immediacy quality in it and all other experiences. And then the thing having it being you is the little tail being wagged by the experience being yours. Everything that's important to you about a subject of experience is in the quality of the experience, right? That is your presence in the world.
Mhm.
That you're here. It's not blank for you, right? And that is your self-interest. That the pains that have that quality are the ones that are yours. Um, and that quality is what makes them so terrible in a self-interested way. If you care about what you, in the usual view, think are the pains of others, you have sympathy and so on. You don't think of them as being in your face like that. But that's the style of being in your face is just general in all experience, and all pains are yours in being frightful like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's nothing about the thing itself that contributes to it being you. Right? Only that it has experience that's yours. But all experience is yours anyway. It is really contributed by the thing having it.
Mhm.
So if there's a view that says, that there's just one thing that's me, I think that's a very unfortunate way of trying to say something like what I'm saying. Um, uh, there are lots of distinct things in the world that all these experiencing things are distinct from each other. And integrated with each other as well.
Mhm.
So it's not revealed in any one of them that all the others are also me. Just because the content of the experience in each case is cut off from all the others. But that's just the problem of information. It's not a metaphysical boundary, which it seems to be.
Mhm. Yeah. No, this is a. I mean, I totally understand that. Yes, your angle on saying that, yeah, experience is yours as opposed to a thing that you are is a, yes, it's a very strong, and it's, I would say, like a novel angle to this whole argument.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm not clear how many people are actually saying that among those who look like Now I haven't read Kolak's book. I had a funny history with him as well, actually.
okay.
Like I know that he read the draft of that paper oneself,
Yeah.
which was published in 1990. The one, that was sent to Stallmaker, right, that I talked about earlier. Uh, I'm, well, let's say I'm almost certain he read it because he was working with another philosopher named Dan Martin
Mhm.
on anthologies. And they published an old paper of mine, Story of a Brain, in one of their philosophy anthologies.
Mhm.
And they were doing another anthology on personal identity. And I sent that rough draft to Martin. That was his last name. Did I say Dan Martin?
You said Van Martin.
No, Dan is
Oh,
called.
there.
Yeah. What was his name? Anyway, I don't think they were both Dan. I would remember that. So I sent him that rough draft of that paper. And I have a letter from him. I've got Parfit's letters too. I'm glad I saved these things. I got a letter saying he found the paper great. He liked it. And that his partner, Dan Kolak, had a view like that. And he would definitely show the paper to him. And he was sure he'd very much want to. But I didn't hear back from them about this. And I'm sure Kolak didn't mention me in his book because I would have heard about that.
Mhm.
So I wrote to Kolak, saying we should be partners in this, and um, and he wrote some friendly letters to me, and then he wasn't writing for a while. then I came across this old letter I just described. I sent a copy of that to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, it reminds me of those cradle days, with um, Martin, whose first name I'm still not remember." And but yes, I don't know what was going on there either. It's just like
Yes.
really perfect.
Another, I mean, maybe definitely something that is more general in that, like, you don't need the distinction between having an experience, being an object versus like having an experience. Was your argument on why the psychological continuity view didn't work, or it was very suspicious? And I totally agree with that, which is that, this idea that, hey, if the psychological makeup, your memories, and so on, is what defines you, that's especially strange because that means that you weren't you before, right? Before acquiring these experiences.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I seem to notice that. Because it's a very popular position, maybe the most popular, that psychological continuity is how you stay the same person through time, right? And in fact, I described the classic debate in philosophy as a debate between those who think of what's crucial to it being you through time is that a certain thing remain the same, right? Um, so far, the way I've been describing it sounds like that, right? But there's a variation on it. I'll get into in a second. So they think either the thing might be physical brain, the thing might be a soul, or mental substance that's immaterial, but that as long as that thing is there, it's still you going into the future, because that's what they concentrate on, what continues you into the future, right?
Mhm.
They don't ask about what made it you in the first place.
Right.
But anyway, so it's the same thingness of it that puts you into the future experiences and makes the pennies yours later on, so that you think of it in a self-interested way and so on. Um, and that means, you could have amnesia and uh, a total wipe of your memories, and it could still be you because it's the same thing. And that's their strong point, that they can make the psychological continuity as loose as they like. And, and it's still been you, and it does indeed seem that you would survive such things. Okay. But their opponents are the ones who believe in psychological continuity as spelling out what you are. There's some reasons for that and presence. So so they think in these things that are often called puzzle cases, going back to Locke, that they think that if somehow the process of memories and intentions is continued in another thing, either, you could do a science fiction brain, um, um, the thing of putting memories from one brain into another, or it could be God is moving the mental process into another immaterial substance, right? If that's what you think a mind is,
Mhm.
right? Um, so the thing would be different, but it would be thinking it was you. And when it started talking, it would swear it's got to be that person who was in the other body originally, because he's saying, I'm over here now. Look, we changed bodies. And it's very convincing that you would be there, right? Um, but and notice then that they're saying you can change the thing, but it would still be you as long as the psychological continuity was in the new thing, right? Put the two positions together, it'd still be you with changed psychological process and changed thing, and you got universalism. You know, so each side has going for it that it does look as though you could still be existing without what the other side said was necessary, right? Of course, with that, if you put the generosity in both directions, what you've got is universalism.
Mhm, mhm.
But anyway, what you were pointing out is this thing I said that they do ignore the proper question, which is what made it you in the first place
Yeah.
before it continued on, right? Just the continuity is making it you. From what? From it being you, obviously. Um, and it's especially troublesome when you point this out for the psychological continuity people. Just think about it, right? So it's still going to be you if all these memories and intentions move on, even if they do it in another thing, a strange puzzle case. So still be you. Um, but there had to have been a beginning of this.
Yeah.
There wasn't yet any psychological continuity, right?
Yeah.
And the thing was you, so that it could be continued into the future by these psychological connections. So what made it you when maybe your first experience was in the womb? I would think that's probably the case, some kind of experience in the womb, some sensations. For me, if it was immediate, and how could it not be immediate if we thought it as an experience, right? If it was immediate, first person in character, right? It was you. And it didn't matter that there was psychological continuity. I mean, the thing
Mhm.
that made it you was not that.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and I would say the same for the other side. They have to begin with something being you, and they haven't explained at all why one particular physical or immaterial thing was you instead of someone else. There's no way they get any handle on that
Yeah.
because there's nothing about these things that you're supposed to be. That would make any of you instead of someone else.
Right. This also connects quite a bit with your discussion on I believe we're like the I guess like it's actually an experiment, the WADA test, right? Like where you temporarily disable one hemisphere at a time. And so you have kind of like this V shape of psychological continuity for a little bit of time you're diverged, but then when you have both of your hemispheres active again, you regain memories of both paths, and that seems to contradict a lot of common sense views. Yeah.
All right, so should I describe that case?
Yes, please, please. I think it's very informative.
So, there's I first introduced this. Well, I I get into things repeatedly, but from somewhat different angles, all the way through the book. Um, and discussing brain bisection begins in the very first. I have two introductions. Right, the first introduction I call the shorter, easier introduction. That's its title. And they're just, it's sort of like what I would say if I was at a party and someone asked me about this, that I run through it in a certain way. And it includes talking about brain bisection. Then there's the second introduction, which I call the deepest joke, that begins with the joke that you've heard about the barber and so on. And then I I begin emphasizing how my view is the reverse of the usual view because it makes the experience being mine central rather than the thing being me. And I go through that for a while. And then I talk about the how different the things in experience we count as being ours, unusual view, can be from each other. How unconnected, how different they can be. We still regard the experiences as mine. So I if you notice the sensations in your toes, and now add 2 and 2. In both experiences have the character named mine, but they're so very different from each other. And I
Mhm.
point out that most of the experiences of my life, I can't remember now. I can't, I'm not really that connected to them. They're all quite disparate from each other. I had wildly different periods. I can drop it off. I can fall asleep and have a very wild dream. Experience is still mine. Um, uh, so I'm emphasizing how generous we can be with regard to it still being my experience with all these, right? But then I say, nevertheless, there does seem to be one thing that anyone with either view would have to agree on, that I couldn't have uh, two mutually excluding experiences at the same time, right? So I could have wildly different experiences on usual view at different times, right? But there's this big thing about if they're at the same time and they're different from each other, I can't have both. Now, and the next section of that second introduction is about brain bisection, where I show that this is not the case. This is a mistake. So I say at the beginning, well, look, there's one thing that's true, that if you're thinking of two experiences that exclude each other, so one has nothing of the other in it, right? Um, I couldn't have them as one experience. I mean, you can't put them together and still have them exclude each other. It's just a contradiction. So they exclude each other. They got nothing to do with each other that way. And you just get this mess if you try to put them together, right? But what I then argue is that if you keep them separate, there's actually no problem with having both of those experiences at the same time, right? Now, later in the book, when I once again discuss brain bisection, I make the point that a barn can be both red and not red at the same time,
Mm.
right? If it's painted red in one part of the barn and painted some non-red color in another part of the barn, where's the problem, right? And I'm of course claiming that it's you in all these different nervous systems and so on. Um, uh, so you're much bigger than you usually thought you were. There's much more of you. So you're like a big barn with a lot of different parts, I mean, all kinds of different colors at the same time. But anyway, now I describe the case of brain bisection, and people were operated on for epilepsy. Corpus callosum that connects the hemispheres, and it turns out integrates their activities with each other, was cut in this operation to keep the epilepsy from traveling from one hemisphere to the other. I know I read it one time or other. They thought it just kept the brain from sagging. they weren't too worried about cutting it. But then they soon somehow found out that, in fact, it was integrating the hemispheres together. It was almost entirely responsible for doing that. So that's when they did experiments, famous experiments in 1960s. I started hearing about it back then. Where, for example, let's say you've got one of these split brain patients, as they're sometimes called, in the laboratory with both hands under a table, so you can't see them. And one object, like a brush, is put in one hand, and another object, like I don't know a spoon. Spoon's usually the one they talk about. Yeah, a spoon is put in the other hand. And I won't go into all the complication of it because, you can talk. Well, let's not get into that. But let's just simply say the hand that was holding the spoon would point to a spoon or a picture of a spoon if asked what was being held. And the hand that was holding the brush would point to a brush, and neither hand could point to the other object held by the other hand. Right? There were so many ways they brought out that there were separate streams of experience occurring at the same time in this brain because of the cut of the integration between them. Now, well, how do we interpret this? It is very disturbing to people, right?
Yeah.
Because it disturbs the basis of the usual view,
Yes.
right? Because usual view has us as distinct things because I could only be having this experience. I couldn't be having another one at the same time. So who's having these two experiences? And when you think a little more about it, you see that you can't possibly say that the original person is now having only one of these. If there'd been a stroke instead, and there was only one hemisphere functioning, for sure that person would continue into the single hemisphere experience, whichever of the two hemispheres was left. Right? That would be that person's experience. How could it cease to be that person's experience just because there's something else going on the other side of the head? Suddenly, the person blinks out.
Yeah.
Makes no sense. So those are the actual cases. But in this same section, in that second introduction, I introduce a thought experiment that occurs in a somewhat similar form in Parfit. And the thought experiment works like this. Very nice. So let me tell it, describe it as happening to me. Suppose I had a button connected to a device that was communicating with a further device in right on the right next to my corpus callosum. If I press that button, anesthetic will be injected into my corpus callosum, and temporarily there will be none of that integration between the hemispheres. Right? Then the anesthetic will wear off, and there will be integration again. A very interesting case to consider. And the story I like to tell is there are two things I want to do tonight. I want to do some dreary audio studying And I mean, I have to. Not going to like it. And listen to a wonderful concert that's being broadcast. And they're at the same time. These things are going to have to happen at the same time. So what do? Now I arrange that the concert goes into my right ear. It's a very good choice because the right ear is connected to the right hemisphere where the musical appreciation is. And I arrange for this studying to go into the left ear, where in the left hemisphere there's speech. So they're quite appropriate. And I'm going to press my button before these two things start so that one thing will not interfere with the other. It'll be a pure experience of enjoyable music and a pure experience of this dreary studying.
Yeah.
So you ask the question, what kind of time will I have? Right? And the prejudice is they're happening at the same time. In each one, it will feel as though this is the only experience that's mine. If there's another experience happening at this time, it can't possibly be mine. That will be true in both experiences. And you can see why. It's quite natural that would happen in both of them. So, but again, I make that point that can't possibly be just one of them where the experience is mine. Just because something's going on across the way. Now you talk about the water test.
Yeah.
You can breathe in here, right? People are sometimes tested to discover which mental functions are in which hemisphere so that there'll be that information in planning operations on their brains. And the test is very interesting. What it involves is anesthetizing a whole hemisphere and then seeing what the other hemisphere can do. And then the anesthetic wears off from the hemisphere that was anesthetized. And now you anesthetize the other hemisphere and see what that one can do. So each is functioning without the other for a period of time. And of course, it's successive. Right? So it doesn't bother us that, I could be in both of them just because times are different. And then, after the anesthetic that wears off in a second hemisphere, the memories are integrated. Right. Now, the case I'm describing is so interestingly related to the water test, which actually occurs. Instead, we're anesthetizing the corpus callosum. So each hemisphere can go into separate experiences that are unintegrated. So we know if we position them in time, where first you did one and then you did the, so first you do the dreary studying, then you do the concert. Oh, fine, I'd have both experiences.
Yeah.
But when they're objectively occurring at the same time, suddenly I can't have both of them. It's just a crazy prejudice.
Yes.
So and then after the anesthetic wears off, when the experiences were had at the same time, but without the integration through the corpus callosum, anesthetic wears off, the hemispheres integrate again. I remember I did the dreary study and it was mine. I mean, what am I remembering about it that makes it mine? It was first person, it was immediate. It had that character that makes it my experience. And I'm remembering the concert was mine too. I had two experiences, right? And if there was a clock in both of them, maybe I know they were at the same time. It doesn't matter. I had both of them.
Yeah.
So, I call the principle that you get from considering this the irrelevance of objective simultaneity. And that is an important principle to understand in understanding universalism. Right? Once you understand that, it opens it all up that, yeah, you are having all those experiences, whether they're simultaneous, successive, or whatever, where there is no integration, it doesn't matter. It's still yours.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, this is all fantastic and very, yeah, very clarifying. I will add maybe another slightly different angle to the same conclusion, which is that once you take into account general relativity, right?
Oh, yes.
There's no such thing as a universal plane of simultaneity. It's all
Yes.
space time, right? It's more like each experiencing, it's inhabiting not only a certain space, but also
Yeah.
its own time, right? So
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah. So
even like we can have simultaneous experiences anyway.
absolutely. I mean, there isn't really objective simultaneity anyway.
Yeah.
I don't go into that in any detail, but I think I have one parenthetical sentence where I say, I'm not even mentioning that in relativity, there's no objective simultaneity. Of course, I'm mentioning it there.
But yes, because you don't have to. The other
I
thought
don't have,
experiment,
I've
yeah.
got so much going for this.
All right, moving on to another very interesting point you made, which was about yeah, a hypothetical world where there's only one red object,
Oh,
and
yes.
then people
Yeah,
assume that because there's only one red object, the redness is the identity of the object, right? I wonder if you,
that's right.
I, yeah,
That's right. So that's like, um, you only, in any of these things you are, you're only experiencing a certain bundle of experience, of experiential content, as having that quality of being mine, right? So it's like a world where you only ever saw one particular thing being read, one object, whatever it is, stone, let's say. Could be more interesting object, I don't know. You could easily become confused and think that to be read requires it being that object, right? Just as you think that for experience to be mine, to have that quality, requires it being a particular limited thing or a mental process, if you emphasize that. I mean, they're both working in the same way, both sides of the classic debate. So, it's a confusion, and you could imagine in that world, you could do this. You're a philosopher in that world, and you introduce a thought experiment. What if we cut that object in two and separated each half of it? Couldn't it still be read on both sides? Doesn't that suggest that this property redness is not in fact confined to one object? Right? And then you introduce that, a thing, a very differently shaped thing could still be read. Um, and that's how you wean people off this laziness, thinking about what red is.
yes.
And of course, I make a parallel point. Well, no, I won't get into that yet. But there being only one novel, one copy of a novel.
Yes, we'll get into that in a moment.
Okay, that's fine.
I wanna comment on the red yeah argument or thought experiment, which is that where I see it a lot on how people intuitively develop the common view is that part of our experience, I mean, part of the flavor of our experience contains the sense of personality, right? The sense of like being not only a person, but like the sense of like your role in life, your emotions, your expressions. And you could easily, assume or mistake that is like that aspect of experience, the thing that defines you. Now, I'm a personal fan of both meditation and also there's a substance called 5-MeO DMT. It's a psychedelic, very specific one.
Yeah.
But both with meditation and on 5-MeO DMT, I've had very clear experiences of the aspect of my experience that corresponds to my personality dissolve, and and then the feeling like, oh my gosh, now it's just a visual field, or it's just a tactile field, without it feeling like it's Andres or it belongs to Andres, which is kind of like finding another object that has the redness and realize, oh gosh, like it has an essential to me all along. Yeah.
It can be very useful.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
and of course, some views that resemble mine, and again, wouldn't buy into all the views that have a resemblance, but certainly many of them were inspired, by meditation and by states that were reached in meditation, and it may have been a similar kind of suggestion, that it's blank. It's I know that in um Hindu philosophy, they talk about the Atman
mhm.
as the pure experiencer, and they made points about how the Atman was capable of entering into all these different experiences, like the points I made earlier, sensations of the toes, adding two and two, um, very different, but the Atman's still there. That's what made it pure, that it wasn't attached to one particular part of mental life. It was there underlying all of it. Um, and in fact, it's not surprising to me that this kind of very loose liberal understanding of what a particular Atman was like, and also they could transmigrate into different bodies. Right, so they weren't limited by the mental content; they weren't limited by the bodies. So that could I think it was called Shankara, when it was at that stage of an individual Atman in each case. But it became Vedantic philosophy, where seeing the featurelessness of this thing finally got them to think there was just one, and the one and the same in all these different beings that had an Atman. It was the same Atman. So you see where that they could go that way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. One maybe this is a small bullet point, but I just want to mention something that you mentioned in the book, which I also I agree, and it's on the usual view among the people who I think like this is probably a minority, but the people who say that the thing that defines you is your particular material composition. You make this very important point that like, well, that would mean that what you ate determines who you are. And it occurs to me that there could even be like a whole religion of like, oh, never eat French fries because you will turn into a different type of person, right? Which is of course absurd,
Mhm.
but
And there are a couple of thought experiments that attack this pretty directly. And they both occur in that second introduction at the end of it. Right? Um, there's the electronic corpus callosum. So where you imagine a device that can integrate two brains in two bodies in the same way the corpus callosum is integrating two hemispheres. And this might be quite useful someday. I could imagine them actually doing this. I couldn't describe in great detail how this was accomplished because it's a complicated task, right? But there's nothing in principle that would stop it. So you have this electronic device, really clever, that so that the sensations of the four hands and the four legs are brought into the same purview, so that the locations were equally part of this same encompassing awareness, right? So that these things could, easily work together that way, or works apart, more to the point, that way. What would it be like? It would suddenly the boundary of the body wouldn't be there for the one consciousness that was inhabiting both bodies. Suddenly it have no personal identity significance, right? The whole thing would be me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if the connection suddenly got interrupted, so that then now there was consciousness, then each will think, yeah, here's where I am, right? But it won't be real. It won't be that there are actually two eyes that are distributed to different bodies. You can see now that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's one thought experiment. The other, I think, it does a nice job on this. So I give it in several different forms, but I'll just whittle it down to one of them. So let's say that God replaces the right side of you with a perfect duplicate instantaneously, perfectly connected with the original left side of you. What will it be like? Will it be that I'm just one half? Would it be I disappeared? No, still got that half of you there. Would it be you're just one of the halves? That's crazy. The pains you feel in this right half, this new, the right half, are immediate. They're yours in the way that really makes them yours. Okay, I mean, you wouldn't even know this happened if you weren't informed of it, because it's being done perfectly by God. Okay, now let's say then, where did he get that half? Well, he had first made a duplicate of it, and he took the half from it. And let's say he took yours and put it in the duplicate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but now he exchanges the other half from the duplicate. Right? So all the matter in there is the matter that was in the duplicate. But you were wholly there after the half was replaced. So of course you're wholly there after another half is replaced.
Yeah.
But your original matter is over there where the duplicate was. And furthermore, the duplicate has to be the same person because, it has to be there with its half in
Yes.
both places. So what this shows is the boundary of the body. Forget it. In the case of both the halves and the wholes that we're talking about, what's in them making it you? It's the immediacy of the experience. That's the whole thing we talked about. Now, of course, so what this is saying is it was originally you to begin with. It didn't have to be exchanged. Right? And so it at this point, it seems to say all precise duplicates of you are you. You're there in all of them. Right? But we only made them duplicates to make it easy to, exchange halves. There was nothing about being duplicate that was really at work here in making both the sides you. and you can introduce changes now and experiences and so on. It'd still be you. So what it's already showing that as long as there's immediacy in the experience of things, they're you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for elaborating on all of that. Um, I want to, yeah, like maybe switch gears a little bit. There was a comment you made about I wonder if you could like yeah, elaborate a little bit about the I thought this was very interesting that you said like the anthropic principle making the case for the multiverse
Yes.
is incomplete without universalism, which
Oh,
I think I agree with, and I hadn't heard that perspective before, but I think
yeah.
it's yeah.
I don't know anyone else who ever noticed it. It's and it's the big stumbling block of physics. I mean, this is enormous. Once people understand this, they understand why the universe has the laws it does. Without understanding this, they don't have a hope in hell of understanding why our universe is anthropic. So, let me explain it. Well, first, let's make sure everyone knows what it means to say that the universe has an anthropic character, so human-centered character. Okay. Um, I give my favorite example in the book of this, which is there are four forces throughout the entire universe, and a certain number of particles, and so, all of this is uniform throughout the universe. And they're quite peculiar because only four forces, and they have very arbitrary seeming characters when you're not making the right connection. And let me concentrate on just one of them, this strong nuclear force. Now, protons repel each other. If you're going to have atoms, you need protons to stick together in the nucleus of the atom, and then you can have electrons around them. So electrons are negative in charge, protons are positive. And if you got a nucleus of an atom with protons, also has neutrons, have protons in it, that's what's going to make the electrons attach themselves to the atom. And that whole thing makes chemistry possible.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, here's the problem. The protons just have an electromagnetic force, which is positive charge. They repel each other. They don't want to get anywhere near each other. But very strangely, there's another of the four forces that attracts them together in the nucleus only when they get close enough. Now, this is how peculiar it has to be for that to be the case. Right? The electromagnetic force, the positive and negative charges, fall off as the square of the distance. So if you're twice the distance, it's 4 times weaker. Now, the strong nuclear force that holds the protons together, right, falls off as the 7th power of the distance. And that's lucky, right? Because if it was strong enough to overcome the repulsion of the protons because they're magnetic charge, strong enough to do that, then, and it fell off as only the square of the distance, it would just pull all these protons together. You never have atoms, electrons around them, and so on. So it's very important that it's stronger than the electromagnetic force. It within like the diameter of the nucleus. but it's not stronger outside that because it weakens much more quickly than the electromagnetic force. Okay. Only with this being one of these four forces fixed in that particular way, do you have anything interesting going on in the universe in the way of chemistry and finally life? And there are all kinds of particular things that have to be true in chemistry that, thank God, are, true, because like the carbon atom has to be peculiar and all. I can't tell you how many things in the universe, in its basic determinations, have to be fixed in a certain way for life to be possible, and of course, consciousness to be possible.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's what it means when you talk about the anthropic principle. Anthropic, human-centered. That look, we're in a universe that is capable of producing us. Huh? Okay, so now, if there's only one physical world, it's an incredibly lucky coincidence that it has an anthropic character. Unless, as some people try to say, there's some god or something that designed it to be like that. Right? But put that aside for now, because in science we don't like to appeal to that unless we're absolutely forced to. So let's try to understand it in purely physical terms. Okay. There is a way. And this is something I thought about many, many years ago when it wasn't yet popular in physics. It's very popular now. I thought if you had loads and loads of differing physical worlds, some impersonal thing at work, making them different, generating different universes in terms of the basic laws and so on. If there were enough of them, it could be that it would no longer be improbable that one or a few of them, or some very small proportion of them, could produce life. Right? And then when I first thought of this, I thought, yeah, and of course we have to be in one that does that. We couldn't be in one that couldn't do that. Right? So that's why the one we see is like that. That's what I thought. Now, I was at the same time, this was back in the 60s, I was already thinking about personal identity as being loosened. So that may have influenced my thinking that way. Years and years later, in physics, it became popular to think this, that the anthropic principle can be explained by multiverse. All right, that terminology's got going. And of course, we'd have to find ourselves in a universe that was like that with those peculiar laws, right? But there's a problem with that, which is that according to the usual view of personal identity, you're stuck in one universe, whether it's, life producing or not.
Yeah.
Right? If there was something even exactly like you somewhere else, it wouldn't be you. It's a mere duplicate. Right? So it's no good having all these differing kinds of universes so that one of them's going to be okay and being like that. Because you're stuck in one, whether it's like that or not. You're no better off than in there being only one physical world. There's no way it could give you any advantage in explaining why your universe is anthropic. But with universalism, it, it is indeed a lubricant. It allows you to be put automatically wherever consciousness is created,
Mhm.
because you simply are all conscious things. So that's why you're there. And that's why your universe has that peculiar character. You'll never be able to explain it. I mean, physicists wanted to explain it in some kind of purely mathematical way, right? So a unified field theory, that kind of thing, will finally explain why you had to have a strong nuclear force that fell off as the seventh power of the distance. Right? You'll never do that. Of course not. Right? Um, and what you will do is you'll explain the relationships universes have to each other and all the differences that they, fall into. And you'll explain that your universe is anthropic by combining the multiverse with universalism.
Mm,
And you
mhm.
can't do it otherwise. It's such a beautiful, um, you know, um, sometimes people discuss this in terms of selection effect, right? That they say our requirement to be in the universe that has this anthropic character is selecting it for our observation. But I point out in the book that you can distinguish a negative selection effect and a positive selection effect. The negative effect just tells you that you couldn't see it unless it was anthropic, but it could never explain to you why your universe turned out to be anthropic.
Yeah.
The positive selection effect only comes with universalism. And it's that you will be in a universe where the laws are like that. Right? So there's a positive selection occurring there. The negative selection is worthless.
Yeah. Yeah, this is fascinating. I really hope this argument is more popularized because it's very clarifying.
Well, yes, we'll never understand physics without it.
Yeah.
And, after I explain this in the book, there's a section where I, I show how universalism is just one stage in the development of science, because the biggest developments in science uh, are where we were freeing ourselves from from the illusions of perspective that we have, um, due to exactly the same thing. Because I haven't been into this with you yet in our discussion, but this the immediacy of experience is not just all there is to an experience being mind. It's also all there is to an experience being now, to
Mm,
an experience being here.
mhm.
All right. Um, and that's the thing that was getting established, most importantly in science, certainly physical side of science. Um, that being here was not being at the center, loosening it up. So you saw that the feeling that we were in a special place was the predictable feeling that what didn't actually single out in some objective way a special place as the center. Okay. Um, and then with relativity, it turning out that a time being now was not an objective determination. It's any experienced time is experienced as now. And the only thing that makes it now is the immediacy of the experience. That makes it, the most general thing that does is it makes it be this experience. every experience that will ever occur is experienced as this experience. It's at this place. It's at this time, happening to this organism. And we turn those into objective determinations rather than a subjective one. So being this place is a big deal objectively, right? All it means, huh? That it being this time is a big deal objectively. So relativity wouldn't work. And it being this organism and this universe blocks you from seeing why the laws are the way they are in our universe. So this is the progress of science. It's one more step in this same direction.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very interesting. This takes me to I mean, yeah, maybe something to touch upon. I mean, I found myself overall with the book agreeing with yeah, pretty much everything you were saying. One place where I would probably have like some counter arguments, it would be interesting to hear is on the unificationism. So I guess by default, and I've actually written a paper similar to Bostrom's paper about slicing an experience and duplicationism and so on. But yeah, I wonder if you might introduce a little bit like your motivation for well, what is unificationism and your motivation for unificationism? Yes.
Well, I discovered unificationism, as Bostrom calls it,
Mhm.
Nick Bostrom. I discovered unificationism first. Right. Um, in the book, I describe what that discovery was like. I mean, first of all, let me just mention when I was 14, I had these thoughts about experience of time. I remember I was sitting at, I don't know if I've said this anywhere, but I was sitting at a, a kind of picnic table in somebody's garden. And I was looking at the slats of wood, and I was thinking of them as segments of time during which experiences were occurring for some subjective experience. And it occurred to me that if you could rearrange these objectively, it wouldn't affect the subjective order of the experience at all.
Yeah.
It couldn't. Right? Later, I liked when I started explaining this kind of thing to begin with an objective gap. So that's quite easy to see. Okay. Now, in the book, I get a kind of a handle on this by talking about magic film. So suppose there was such a thing as a magic film that sort of had within it all the experiences of your life. Okay. Now, this can be played on a projector, and there can actually be an audience sitting there, and they're only watching the visual part of it, like it's like a movie for them. While the projector is, having this sent through it. But for you, each frame is the next actual whole complete experience. Right. So you've got that, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that the projectionist is showing your life movie theater to an audience, and it's moving along, and you're feeling it, right? As the film is running through the projector, and then it's time for refreshments for the audience. He stops the film. They have the refreshments. How long does it take them? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a billion years. It won't matter. Then he hits the switch, he starts the projector again, and you move on into the next part of your experience. The next moment, would you experience the gap? The objective? Of course not. You couldn't possibly experience it, right?
Right.
And you can begin to see if you splice the film and show it in different order with flashbacks, so on, that won't be experienced any differently by you. Okay. Now let's focus on a certain point that we can make. You don't experience the gap, no matter how long it is. If we've frozen it at one point.
Mhm.
Okay. So that means we could do something different. What we could do is he's frozen at half, half your life. Well, when you're just about to enter into something or other, and just frozen. Now, because gaps don't matter, we could have two showings of the second half of your life, positioned in objective time, one after the other. And your experience will just be a seamless moving into the rest of your life, no matter how many of these there are.
Yeah.
It can't be multiplied within your experience. So there's no objective gap within your experience. There's no objective multiplicity within your experience, right? There's just that one experience. And this is what, and Bostrom called this position unification, because the experiences are all unifying, right? But when this happens.
Yep.
And he called his position against this duplication, so that for him there'd be more experience. Right. So I mean, you get these very strange results from unification.
Yeah.
Like if you had a choice between 1,000 absolutely duplicate occurrences of a day of torture, or just one objective realization of the day of torture, plus somebody stomping on your foot.
Right.
You ought to choose the 1,000 absolute duplications.
Yeah.
Because objectively just be that one day, and you'd spare yourself the experience of having your foot stomped on as well.
Yeah.
And I am sure that's true. Now, so you're going to say, am I willing to?
It's a test of fire. Yeah.
Yeah, fortunately, I'm not. We don't have the means to do this. But there are two ways I analyze this as unification. Right. One is I call phenomenological, and that's the one I've been describing to you. I enter into this in connection with Nietzsche's eternal recurrence in the book. Right. So what I get from this is that there'd be just, if the world repeated precisely, all that experience would just be one experience of life for me. Even if it was repeated infinitely, objectively, subjectively, just that one line. But then I change over into a different angle of discussing this, which I call ontology, as opposed to phenomenology, where I'm talking about a distinction between types and tokens. Right. And I particularly introduce this when I move into talking about simultaneous duplicates, um, which I've already discussed in the phenomenology part as well, but I concentrate more on this when I'm talking about those. Now let me say how I came up with this. When I was 14, I looked at those slats in the picnic table and had that thought. When I was 15, this happened to me. I had a conversation with my best friend, Bert, in Sage Allen's cafeteria in Hartford. It served the best coleslaw I've ever tasted. From a very young child, I'd eat there as often as possible. Anyway, Bert and I were sitting at these round tables in Sage Allen's cafeteria. And he talked to me about a science fiction story he'd read by Arthur C. Clarke. It was called The Other Tiger. And in it, Clarke has two friends walking along a road. And they're talking about what would be the case if the universe was infinite. And they're saying, well, there'd be an infinity of us walking along the road, and there'd be all these variations. The Nazis won the Second World War. And then finally they get over sort of the crest of a hill, and they talk about how when we get around that hill, we'll see the tiger in loads of them. The tiger will be friendly, the tiger will be vicious. So in this story, the kind of punchline is that they see some monster that had worked its way up from the subterranean depths, because of rains or something like that. And, so it's the other tiger. Okay. Now, so I was talking to Bert about this idea of an infinite universe, entertaining lots of Berts and Arnolds and Sage Allen's cafeterias. But discussing it, of course, I thought these are mere duplicates, right? I mean, when we died, it might be slightly comforting to think there'd be Berts and Arnolds carrying on elsewhere. But it would be sort of a poetic thing, when we would be insulated from them, in that they wouldn't be us. Okay. Of course, obviously, I believed in the usual view at that point.
Mhm.
But then a couple of weeks later, I remember we were in front of G. Fox department store, which is quite a wonderful place, and again in downtown Hartford. And all of a sudden, Burke told me that he'd come across an article, newspaper article about a Russian, a Soviet at the time, Soviet experiment where they exchanged the brains of dogs. I've never heard anything more about that, but I could imagine I'm doing it. And I imagined something else at that point. Suddenly, a thought experiment hit me. Two duplicate, this time human brains, right? Like the one in me then, that were controlled. They're in vats. They're controlled, to have exactly the same experience. All right. So there, and what I thought was, suppose they were divided extremely neatly into equivalent quarters.
Mhm.
but they were kept going. And you traded one of the quarters, right? You changed the equivalent quarters. Um, let's say I was in the one on the left with the experience, being there in front of G Fox. And the one on the right, precisely similar in the content of experience, precisely like my brain in every way. And now a quarter of what was in my brain is exchanged with a quarter of what was in that brain. So what I thought was, I couldn't have gone over to the other side with just a quarter of my stuff going over. But I wouldn't be 3/4 on the left because, we're stipulating that the connections are all exactly the same and so on. It would still be me in that same experience. But now we exchange another quarter and it must still be the same,
Mhm.
right? By the same logic. Then a third quarter and then a fourth. At no point could I have gone over to the other side. It was wholly there at every stage. And yet, the end effect would be like having picked up the brains and exchanged places. And then I would swear that I go from the left to the right. Right? So something screwed up about the way in which I'm connecting experience to the particularity of brains.
Mhm.
And what I realized was that I had been in both at the same time. So what I had there was unification as a result of that thought experiment. And this thing really grabbed hold of me because I put it together with the duplicates in the universe. They're not duplicates. We can birth and they'll be there, even if we disappear. So and the experience will be, I mean, if an experience was wiped out suddenly by some, you know, unexpected disaster in one of these places, if it continued on in the other, it'd be the same experience continuing on. Now, so I describe this in the book, and then I move into, as I said, this ontological analysis of what's going on, where I distinguish between a token and a type. So the example I use is a novel. Now, the novel, Moby Dick, is a detailed type. And each copy of Moby Dick is a token of that type. And the logic of token and type are different. So if you destroy a copy, the copy's destroyed. But the novel Moby Dick is not destroyed.
Mhm.
It's there in every copy. And there are characters in the novel, right? The ones who are having the adventures. So there's Ishmael. And he's there in every copy. What I came to realize is that the pattern, which was an experience, was a type and not a token. It wasn't held down, but any more than the particular atoms in the copy of Moby Dick have some kind of purchase on it. I mean, now we can talk just as we did with the red object. Imagine there's a world where they only ever have one copy of any novel.
Mhm.
Right? So easy to think that all the literary quality and things like that attached to the particular copy. That's the only one they've ever seen of Moby Dick. Right? But if you do thought experiments with them, you can
Mhm.
wean them out of this, just as we did with the red object. And you can do thought experiments like you can have two copies. I've done this in lectures, ever since the 70s, where I've sliced the book down the middle, the binding. Of course, this is a very naughty thing to do. I did indeed do that. And that exchange halves between two copies of the same
Nice.
novel.
Yeah.
Has the novel changed over here? No. That's what I was doing in that thought experiment when I was 15 in 1961. Um, so, uh, this is unification.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, of course, the way I was thinking of it then, I concentrated on precise duplication with the same um precise same type occurring in each of the copies. But it's the gateway to universalism. And once the token no longer matters to whether it's you,
Mhm.
then you can begin thinking about to what extent the type might matter. And there are ways of showing it can't, right? Probability arguments. They shift in character a bit what they're centering on, but they have the same kind of effect. So I mean, how improbable I would exist if the token had to be a particular one, as it is in the usual view. Um, uh, that token has to organize itself in the right place and the right time and all that. Uh, um, it's absurdly improbable that I, came into existence.
Mhm.
But you loosen up the token, and you're sort of in business. But and here's the probability consideration regarding particular types. The type, if the type sort of defined me, if I would only be that which existed in various tokens, but was of a particular narrow type, what would be coincidental would be that I'd be a natural type, right? Because the types of experiencing beings, right? If you're thinking of all the types there could be, most of them are chaotic. So most identities, if that's what identities were stuck to,
Mhm.
most identities would be chaotic ones. See, but if instead I find that my experience is of a type that naturally comes about, that requires that I be the kind of being that can take its type from nature itself, from what nature forms. So I'm not restricted in my type. Right? Uh, and that's why the type has to be open as well as the token. And the two together are universalism.
Mhm. Mhm.
I didn't fully realize this till 1983 when this suddenly hit me. And because I was already fooling around with the probability argument since 79, 80. But I thought that we were stuck within certain time. In fact, it became very radical where I had a Buddhistic kind of view. But it wasn't you were stuck in the moment of a career of a particular organism.
Yeah.
I call these moment universals. They would occur wherever they are.
Yeah.
But they weren't threaded together by anything.
Yeah.
So it was easy to become Buddhistic about it.
Yeah, a kind of a type Buddhism or something.
Yeah, that's right. And if the type, well, if you've loosened up the token completely, that already can be applied to the anthropic principle, right? Because you can be, in a different universe as long as the type turns up. So I was thinking about how probability applied to that. But then finally, in 1983, I was forced by this consideration of the improbability of the type being natural into the full-blown universalism. And I began to understand it better and better. One perhaps lucky thing, I don't know just how influential it was, but I had a group, a tutorial group, that wanted to do Hegel, which I don't do normally. I studied Hegel a couple of times as an undergraduate and then in graduate school. So I was kind of familiar with phenomenology of mind. But they wanted to start in that, and we started in the first section, which was called sense certainty. And in that, Hegel was saying that now and here and mine were universals, not particular. Right. And that helped me to see where I needed to go to solve this problem. There were other things that worked too, but I think that was kind of lucky that we read that.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I've yeah. I should mention I'll have to leave in a few minutes, unfortunately. But I mean this has been super awesome. I thought it was delightful. Yeah.
I've enjoyed it enormously. You're a terrific person to talk to about this. And of course, you're me.
Yes. Hello, me.
Hi. How is it over there?
Yes.
It's good, I can tell.
Yes, having a fun time. So I really hope the recording works. If it doesn't, we might need to do this again, but it hopefully wouldn't be too
There are
much of a
worse
problem.
things.
There's more things, yeah. But
Lovely.
thank you so much. Super delightful. And if it works out, I'll edit the video. I'll put it out there. I'll send you a link. And
Marvelous.
awesome. Well, we will be in touch, and more to come.
Hopefully will. Yeah, I'll enjoy it right now.
All right, I'll stop the recording now.